Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eterberg, and today I'll be discussing the 1929 film Their Own Desire with my friend Maria Banson, who writes the Brunello Bombshell newsletter. Maria, I think this is now your fourth appearance on the podcast, if I'm not mistaken, so welcome back.
Great to be back. Thank you for having me again.
And before we get going, remind listeners one more time who you are and where they can find your work online.
I am Maria Banson. I'm a certified sommelier and currently studying for the advanced sommelier exam. You can find me on Substack at brunellobombshell.substack.com, Instagram and TikTok at Brunello Bombshell. I do a lot of wine and movie pairings online, so this is an extra special treat today.
Well, before we get into Their Own Desire, I want to update our place in history as we've been doing. It's only been a few days since the last nominated film, Sally, that we talked about last week, was released on December 23rd, 1929, this film being released December 27th. So not a whole lot of time for a lot of history to happen. Obviously, the world is going to celebrate Christmas in that time on the 25th. Any news or anything you wanted to touch on from that period before I give my couple things?
Honestly, this was a really boring time in terms of the other half of my world. Prohibition was in full force in the United States, so while it was coming around the curve in 1933 was when prohibition was abolished. There's still a lot of bootlegging, a lot of secret winemaking, and a lot of quote unquote medicinal wine that was being made in the homes of everyday Americans.
I'm sure. Yeah. And somehow we still see it in all these films that I've been watching. Practically every film where, especially the ones where there's a lot of high society folks, everybody's drinking. They don't care.
Yep, and everybody's drinking bubbles, which is an additional separation from the regular people who were not allowed to drink, and champagne, which
Right.
had to have been imported.
Well, just a couple of historical notes from this time period. I didn't actually usually we touch on some notable births and deaths. I didn't have any of those in these couple days. December 24th, so Christmas Eve of 1929, there was actually a fire in the West Wing of the White House, which President Hoover was pulled away from a Christmas Eve reception for some children in the White House to, I guess, help collect documents and try and save some important things that were needed to be saved. And this is actually the biggest fire in the White House since it was burned by the British in the War of 1812, over 100 years prior to this. So I guess good that not a whole lot of big fires are happening in the White House, but interesting that we've got a couple of notable ones there. And then two notes I had on Christmas Day. So December 25th, the government of Saxony granted amnesty to 179 political prisoners as a quote unquote Christmas gift. I guess I'll take it if that's what my gift is from the government, I'll take it. And then on a little bit of a downer, in Germantown, North Carolina, there's a sharecropper, I think he was a tobacco farmer named Charles Davis Lawson, murdered his wife and 6 of his 7 children on Christmas Day. There's a whole lengthy Wikipedia article on it. I was kind of going down the rabbit hole, but it's one of those, you see the Lawson family murder is the headline, and you got to kind of go down the rabbit hole a little bit. So happy Christmas for the political prisoners in Saxony getting a reprieve. Not a happy Christmas for the Lawson family all around. So those were the only, no, like I said, no major historical notes during this time. Again, it's Christmas time. In terms of history, it's kind of quiet, but some notable events that happened there. So let's move right into the film. Their Own Desire, as I mentioned, was released December 27th, 1929. It was directed by E. Mason Hopper from a screenplay by Francis Marion, James Forbes, and Lucille Newmark. And it is based on the 1929 novel of the same name by Sarita Fuller, which was a pseudonym of writer Beulah Marie Dix.
It stars Norma Shearer as Lucille Lally Marlett, Belle Bennett as Harriet Marlett, Louis Stone as Henry Marlett, Robert Montgomery as John Douglas Cheever, and Helene Millard as Beth Cheever. The film has a running time of 65 compact minutes and was distributed by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer.
And the only nomination for the film came for Shearer for her nomination for Best Actress, which we'll talk about. She actually won for a different film, not this one. And the film is available on DVD as well as on YouTube as of this recording. So you mentioned, this is a very compact, nice, tight film, 65 minutes, just a little over an hour. And the plot is fairly straightforward when you get right down to it. So the film opens with Lally, the Norma Shearer character, and her father Henry. They're out playing polo. They're setting up a polo match. Polo with horses, not water polo. Let's just make that clear. So they're talking about having the women play against the men, and there's kind of a little discussion on that. Eventually, they get playing, and I thought had some really impressive action shots of the actual polo match right at the beginning of this film, which kind of drew me in immediately.
Yes, this film, I one of the things that initially intrigued me about it was that it had a really intriguing portrayal of a lead female who was unabashedly athletic in a time when femininity was truly prioritized. In the opening scene, we have that polo match. Norma Shearer is out doing her thing with the really cool polo pants. We do see her getting winded at one point, but she's able to stay on the horse and quip and gab with the rest of the men like nobody's business. It is in this first scene that we truly see that she was the inspiration for the Katharine Hepburns of the world to come in later into the film oeuvre.
Yeah, definitely. No, she's holding her own with the guys, and like you said, she falls off the horse at one point, gets winded, kind of gets brushed off a little bit, gets right back on, and keeps playing, and finishes out the match even through a little mishap. So she's after the polo match, she's walking home with her father, and they're talking about the next book that he's writing. He's an author, and he is telling her that this next book that he's writing is about a 45-year-old man who's fallen in love.
It's the story of a man about 45 who falls in love with a...
45 and falls in love?
She starts kind of ribbing him about this. And of course, we soon find out that it's not really a book, it's actually what's going on in his own life at this time. Because when they get back to the home, the wife there, Harriet, Mrs. Marlett, is there entertaining, I guess, family friend of some sort named Beth Cheever. They're having tea together outside, just doing the chit chat thing. And when Mrs. Cheever goes to leave, Henry walks her out to her car. And then we see them kind of in the background. He's very close to her as she's in her car getting ready to leave. And, obviously, we find out fairly quickly that they are having an affair, and eventually this leads to about a year later, we find out that Henry and Harriet are getting a divorce, but somehow, by some miracle, Lally doesn't know any of this yet.
I don't know how she doesn't know it a year later, but that's
Right. Yeah. And the scene. So we cut to there's a title card that says 1 year later. We cut to this scene where Harriet is her and her maid servant there is kind of packing things up, and she's going to leave somewhere. And she's talking about basically they are getting divorced. It sounds like proceedings have been been going on for a while between the husband and wife.
Yep.
And Lily still has no clue. She's still pretty happy go lucky and seems completely oblivious until she is sent down to go and ask the father, Henry, to come with them on this trip, which seems silly if they're about to get divorced, but it serves the plot, I suppose. And this is when she walks in and sees Henry and Mrs. Cheever in an embrace, and this leads to a whole fairly lengthy scene between Henry and Lally where they're discussing kind of what's been going on and what's going to come in the future.
Yeah, this is where it starts to get really interesting here. With Lolly kind of being at the center of everything, she finds herself caught in the middle between her every child's desire to have their parents stay together, but also be supportive of her dad, who she clearly loves very much, and like support him in whatever new path he's choosing. And it's set up from the very beginning of the movie that she is truly caught in the middle of people's desires, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting in the scene where I think it's when they're on their walk back from the polo match back to the house. She says something about, you're a great dad or you're a really good dad.
You're a great kid.
And say, you're not a bad dad, if I do say so myself.
It's clear that she admires her father, looks up to him, and that is all kind of thrown askew once she sees him with another woman.
That's the truly the moment in somebody's life when you realize that your parents are not just parents, they are human beings.
Yep, they're human beings. They make mistakes. They're just as fallible as anybody else. So we cut to once they finish this discussion, we cut to another title card. It says "Summers on the Shores of Lake Michigan." So we're actually finally given a little geographical location for the film, and we see I thought it was a really cool pool facility with some diving platforms, and this is where we meet a young man named Jack. He's kind of talking up all the ladies at the pool. You can clearly tell he's a ladies' man, and enjoys being a ladies' man as well. And he happens to see Lolly up on top of one of the diving boards, and as she dives into the water, he jumps into the water fully clothed and kind of, I guess, introduces himself underwater, for lack of a better word.
By forcing himself on her.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
pretty much.
when I'm diving into a pool, I don't necessarily expect someone to jump in fully clothed and, like, try to make a move.
Yeah, especially a complete I mean, it didn't seem like they had any knowledge of who each other were, at this point, which is obviously part of the gag that involves their relationship that starts to build. But, yeah, a complete stranger coming up to me at the bottom of the pool after I've just dived in is not what I would normally expect.
No. But again, it goes back to that athleticism of Lolly, who clearly has other things on her mind that are
Yeah.
not, relations with the opposite sex.
Yeah, and I think that's shown too that she, they get out of the pool, she just wants to keep going and she wants to go back up the stairs and dive again. And he's, really pressed and he's like, well, I'm just going to keep following you. And eventually he does end up diving in after her the next time from the diving board this time. It was such a kooky scene, but I loved it all the same.
Yeah, it's the earliest meet cute I've ever seen.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually saw I was gonna mention this later, but, I saw a little piece of trivia about those, that pool, that diving area, and, those scenes were filmed at the Norconian Resort Supreme in Norco, California, and according to the Wikipedia of this film, it said that as of 2008, the pools were still there even though the diving boards were gone, and it was located in the California Rehabilitation Center, which is a prison in Norco, California. I did a quick Google Maps look at that location, and I didn't see any pools still there in 2025, so I think they're probably gone at this point, but supposedly, as of 17 years ago or so, they still existed from way
Wow.
back in 1929. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what the Wikipedia says.
Well, at the very least, it's cinematic history that stayed around longer than we expected it to.
Exactly, exactly. So then they cut to later that evening, and the two of them are dancing. They're at some sort of party, gala, ball. I don't. It's not really made clear, but they're dancing together. They're having a good time, and I felt like this was the obligatory. We have sound in film now. We have to have a major musical number,
Yep.
and that was this dance scene.
And again, we see champagne everywhere. So you know at this
Yeah.
point, because we are in the throes of prohibition, that these people are wealthy because they had to have that imported and sneakily imported from Europe.
Right. And it's not that they're just having it in their home. It's a party with a lot of people there, so it's not like they can feign ignorance if they get caught.
Nope. And feasibly, there are people who are in government positions or positions of power there. So there's a lot of people turning a blind eye to basically party.
Exactly. So they leave the dance together. He carries her out to his car. They go out for an evening drive. He tries make some more moves on her, gives her some kisses and some hugs, and she kind of pretends that she's not really into it, but she is. And that's clear when she gets home, tells her mother all about this guy Jack that she met, and that's when she realizes that she doesn't know his last name, which of course we're starting to connect the dots of who he actually is. So then the next day, the two of them go out for a boat ride. They're strolling through the woods. He's talking about taking her to church, in terms of getting married to her. And then they soon discover I, again, it's a little bit contrived how they make this reveal happen to the characters. She ends up getting a splinter on a tree, and he pulls out a knife to try and get it out. And he talks about that his father was a doctor, and that's when he drops his father's last name, the Cheever, and we discover that Jack Cheever is the son of Mrs. Beth Cheever that Lolly's father is having an affair, ran off with. So she gets worried. Now she's kind of falling into the not exactly the same situation as she was mad at her father for doing, but it's uncomfortable for her to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. When you hear that last name, that brings up all sorts of feelings. But that's where the soap opera begins, really.
Right, exactly.
Up until this point, it's been pretty fluffy, but as soon as that last name drops, the tone of the movie shifts completely.
Yeah. So there's another sort of party that evening, it appears, and they kind of go off and have a private conversation, and they I guess you would say their first their first fight together as a couple. And he ends up, he's kind of saying, we loved each other before we knew who we were, so why does that make a difference? And she's kind of standing by it that, I can't go through with this. He ends up walking away, but she breaks down and starts crying, so he comes back, and then we see them together a little bit later, and this was my if I had one major critique of the film, it's that we could keep seeing time pass, and it's never really clear how much time has passed,
Yeah.
other than when we get that 1 year later at the beginning, because we see them, after they're at this, having this little fight, and they've, seems like they get back together. The very next scene is she's in, some home, I'm assuming it's her home, playing the piano. He comes in and, they're getting cuddly on the piano bench, and it seems like whatever happened in that previous scene is long gone to memory. So it's unclear, it could be a day, it could be 6 months for all we know.
Yeah. And again, since we have that time marker in the beginning, it would be nice to have some sort of frame of reference as to when that happens. We can assume that some significant time has passed and that the two lovers have gotten comfortable in their relationship, but we don't know. It could be days, it could be hours, could be months.
Yeah. So they're, obviously they're happy together at this point, and again, this is what makes it confusing as to how much time has passed. So they're together there, they're happy, and in comes Harriet, the mother, and she seems to not. Lally introduces Jack as Jack Cheever, and Harriet's kind of like, "Yeah, I know who he is. Why wouldn't I know who he is?" But it seems like she knows who he is, but she hasn't known that they are together, I guess up until this meeting here.
Yeah. It's the second hurt or the second wave of hurt with the last name getting dropped that really fuels Harriet over the edge. But and see, this is where I feel like maybe having no time card isn't necessarily a bad thing because we can intuit how much time has passed just based on the fact that Harriet has no idea that Jack Cheever is the one that Lolly really wants to get together with, and that
Yeah.
the last name Cheever is involved here. I would assume that if Lolly were completely above board, as she would be with her mother, that not significant time has passed. I would assume it would be more on the weeks rather than the months end of things.
Yeah. So Harriet, the mother, she's obviously quite distraught. Lolly kind of sends Jack away. She's going to go in and talk to her mother and kind of sort things out a little bit. And this is where Harriet goes into the bathroom at one point during this conversation. We hear a glass shatter, and we see her that she's taken something, whether it's just the water or something else. And we kind of fear the worst, assume the worst. Did she try and, do something to take her own life because she just can't deal with this family, this Cheever family, taking yet another person out of her life? So Lally's, desperately trying to get into the bathroom, finally does end up getting in with the help of some other folks nearby. And turns out that mother just fainted and kind of comes to, and they get her into bed. Doctor comes, checks her out, and says, "Oh, she's going to be better. She's just got to rest," kind of thing.
Just a quick side note here. The thing that really gets me rankled, especially since Lolly has been seen as such an independent woman throughout most of the movie, that not only is Lolly not the person to bust open the door, it is literally one man surrounded by five women who we don't see during the rest of the movie,
Yeah.
who are just being the nosy lookers on as they're trying to get the door busted open. For some reason, this rubbed me the wrong way because Lolly has been depicted as being so independent and strong-willed throughout that my studio brain is going, you could have saved money on the extras and just had Lolly open the door herself. Shouldn't be that hard.
Right. Yeah. Give her some agency. Have her go get an axe. Have her go get a key.
Exactly.
Rather than just banging on this bathroom door desperately in a panic. But I guess, maybe she's wasn't thinking straight in a panic. Who knows?
Or it's a 21st century edit on a very 20th century story.
Yeah, very, very true. So after this, there's a brief scene where Jack Jack is somewhere else entirely. He's at some sort of hotel or something, and he gets a letter in the lobby from Lally. Opens the envelope, and it's just the rings that he had given her in one of the earlier scenes. So basically, she's saying it's over without saying it's over, I suppose.
Yeah.
But but then sometime later, again, some time passes. Things seem to have settled down a little bit. Harriet seems to be doing better, but still she's not quite 100%. The two of them are sleeping one night, the Lally and Harriet, in separate beds in the same room together. And Lally goes to the window and happens to see Jack out in the garden, kind of lurking, for lack of a better term, and trying to get in touch with her, I suppose. And nowadays we probably call that stalking, but
Again, 21st century terms
in
here.
this case, she kind of falls for it and goes out to meet him once she's sure that her mother is asleep. This is where they go out on another boat ride, and there was a note earlier in the scene that there was a storm coming, and of course, as they're out on the boat ride, the storm comes up. On their way home, the boat capsizes, and they both end up in the water. And we don't know what happens to them at that point. It kind of cuts away, and the next scene, I think, is Henry, the father, receiving a phone call telling him that Lily and Jack have drowned. So again, we assume the worst. We don't know for sure, but his information is that they have drowned somewhere together.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan. Before this point, in the scene with Lolly's dad and Jack's mom, was Lolly's father saying that he could quote unquote hear his daughter calling out for him?
It's all so ridiculous, darling, just because you've had a dream.
Oh, you wouldn't understand. There's something wrong, and I know it. I've always known ever since she was a little girl.
Yeah, that he sensed that something was wrong. He could hear her calling to him, whether it's a psychic connection or actual. It's never really clear, but clearly can tell that something has happened, something is wrong, and then, like you said, like I said, the phone call kind of confirms his worst fears.
Yeah. But again, it highlights the connection between Lolly and father because that it's been clear from the beginning of the movie that those two have a special relationship between parent and child that goes acknowledged but also contributes to Lolly's feeling of tension throughout the movie.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a search going on. We get some newspaper articles. I think it's been a couple of days that the newspaper says that these two are missing. Feared the worst, essentially. And Henry, the father, arrives, basically leaves the Mrs. Cheever behind and goes to find his daughter. Goes flying around in his own plane. Appears with binoculars looking for the two of them. And this is where we finally see Jack and Lolly. Lolly is alive. She's holding Jack, and it's kind of unclear initially whether or not he is alive or if he's just unconscious. And we see Henry, he's found them. He comes up along with another rescuer. That other person takes Jack away. And this is kind of the big reconnection moment for Henry and Lally. Initially, she's in some sort of shock. She doesn't recognize him, and eventually, she does kind of recognize him, calls him dad, and he's there to take care of her. Dad is still dad even after everything else that has happened.
Yep. And again, their connection and their bond supersedes any other tension or conflict that may have been there earlier. At the end of the day, it's them two.
And then again, sometime later, as I've said multiple times in all these transitions, Henry comes in. He comes to see Harriet, who's there. She seems to be much better now at this point, and basically he's telling her that Jack has woken up. Lally's in there with him, and then we see Lally and Jack together. Jack's in bed. Obviously, he's not 100% recovered, but he's conscious. He's awake. He's there with her. And she's kind of teasing him. She's got the rings once again. She kind of teases him that, oh, you're going to put these back on my hand. And which, of course, he does. They hug and roll credits.
Happy ending.
Happily ever after, we assume. As it feels like a lot of the movies of this period are. You get that happy embrace at the end and you assume everything works out for the best, but we never know.
Yeah. But in the thinking that a movie captures the most stressful or important moments of somebody's life, to leave it on that note makes sense, but still, gives us the template for the true Hollywood ending.
Yeah, exactly. Anything we missed in the plot summary that you want to touch on?
No, I feel like we really got a solid plot summary here. The themes really come alive in the second half of the movie where it does take a turn for the melodramatic. But there's some really interesting production design stuff that happens throughout the movie that's fascinating to take a look at and consider how it became the sort of beginning of the evolution of how American life looked on cinema over the first years of the popularization of American film.
Before we get into too much on that, I do want to touch on all of the folks involved, obviously. So E. Mason Hopper, the director, primarily a silent film director, but did work a little bit into the sound era. The one bit I had on him was that he actually appeared as an uncredited as a doctor in Sunset Boulevard of all places.
Oh, man, I'm gonna have to go back to that now and watch that. That's funny.
Yeah, I just rewatched that about a month or two ago, and now I have to go back and see. Obviously, he didn't appear in this film because he was the director, but it'd be interesting to see him on screen there.
Yeah.
I did like seeing several women involved in the writing process on this. Obviously, the novels based that it was based on is written by a woman, Sarita Fuller, or Beulah Marie Dix, as her given name was. So she was a fairly prominent screenwriter, author, playwright, and it was interesting to me, that she used this Sarita Fuller pseudonym. And from what I read, kind of her career went downhill after that. And it reminded me a little bit of early in Stephen King's career. He'd seen some success, and then he had a couple of novels published under pseudonyms that didn't do nearly as well because people didn't know they were Stephen King novels. And then he went back to Stephen King. So it just reminded me of that when I read that about her.
That's fascinating.
And then, so Frances Marion, over 325 scripts in her writing career in Hollywood. Did a lot of writing for Mary Pickford, who obviously you and I talked about quite a bit last time you were on. And she was the first woman to win an Academy Award for writing, and the first person to win 2 Academy Awards in that category, and the first woman to win any Oscar that wasn't in the Best Actress category. So everything except the Best Actress categories for the previous 2 years had been men, and she was the first one to win the third year in a non-acting category.
How cool. I had no idea, but that makes the movie even that much more meaningful. I mean, we talked about earlier that the agency that Lolly has throughout the movie is surprising but nice to see in a film from 1929, and seeing these huge credits of females being leaders in their industry in an era when necessarily they weren't allowed in the room or they were just starting to take advantage of the room was huge.
Yeah. And yes, and obviously, the other big name, or the biggest name probably at this time, was Norma Shearer in the lead role as Lally. Talked to quite a bit about her when I talked about The Last of Mrs. Cheyney with Shauna Carroll a couple of months back. And obviously we'll return to her for the film that she won for this year, The Divorcee, in, I think it's late January, right after Christmas of this year that episode's going to come out. So I'm interested to see comparisons between 3 films all released in mid to late 1929, all featuring Norma Shearer once I've seen all 3 of those. Anything on Norma for you?
I'm probably gonna save it a lot for the Oscar speech, but definitely the appeal to watching this movie was Norma Shearer. And I've never seen a Norma Shearer film before, and now I'm really glad to have done that. I am now more invested in seeing her on screen, and I want to go back and see her other nominated movies. So I'll spill more when it comes time to talk about the Academy Award recognition. But I am officially a Norma Shearer fan after having seen this movie.
Yeah, no, I definitely, this was the third that I've seen of her. Last of Mrs. Cheyney was a starring role, and then she was in the Hollywood Review of 1929, just in one short scene. So not really a star by any means, but um, yeah, I definitely am a fan as well. I enjoy her performances. Belle Bennett, who plays the mother, Harriet, not a whole lot on her, although I did see that she was kind of typecast in the mother roles in the late 20s and early 30s. and actually passed away in 1932 at the young age of 41. So
Oh, wow.
she was typecast as a mother, as an older character, even at the age of, late 30s, early 40s, which, as someone who is in that age range, it kind of annoys me nowadays, but obviously it was a different time back then.
Well, and we talked about earlier in the film how Henry was writing a book about a 45-year-old and saying that that was Lolly saying that that's truly like who wants to read anything about a middle-aged person. But then when you realize that people are dying younger and younger, that just hits home even more.
Yeah. And you mentioned Henry. So Lewis Stone, we've talked about him, or I've talked about him several times before. He actually, I hadn't counted this up, but he appeared in 8 of the Oscar nominated films from just the first 3 years of the Oscars alone.
Wow.
So the first year he was in The Private Life of Helen of Troy, which unfortunately is lost. The second Oscars, he was in The Patriot, which is also lost. Wonder of Women, which is also lost. And then A Woman of Affairs and Madam X, which we've covered previously on the podcast. And then this year, it's Their Own Desire. So this film, The Big House, and Romance. So he was not Oscar nominated, except I think he was for The Patriot for acting. But other than that, he's just been in a lot of Oscar nominated movies for the first couple of years.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I it
Yeah.
I just now we think about the era of movie stars who get a number of films released within the same year, but they're filming for 5 years to get 3 films
Yeah.
released in the same year. I can't imagine how much time he must have spent on set to work on 8 films that were nominated for Academy Awards in the first 3 years of the ceremony. That's really insane.
And that, I mean, that wasn't even all of his films in that period either. There's still plenty more that weren't nominated that, a lot of these actors, they're cranking out 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 films in one year sometimes. That's the studio system at work, I suppose. And then the last 2 folks, so Robert Montgomery as John Douglas Cheever, aka Jack, as he's called in the film. This was, I think, one of his first films, if not the first film in his career after being a stage actor. He was also in The Divorcee, as well as The Big House, so we'll be touching on him a couple more times this season. The 2 little bits that I had that I thought were interesting for him was that he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild in the 1930s and again in the late 40s. The second time he was president, the person who succeeded him in that role was none other than Ronald Reagan,
Hmm.
who would obviously become president somewhere else further down the road. And then he also served in the Navy during World War II and he had a whole slew of medals, including a Bronze Star for his service during the war.
It's so cool to see the parallel entertainment careers of those who have led SAG, what is now the Screen Actors Guild, combined with AFTRA. A lot of times, the SAG president is somebody who is voted on by the membership based on not only their artistic achievements, but their activism and their political work. And because Robert Montgomery was so active with rallying the SAG database, but also he was very active in the political campaigns of Republican candidates during his lifetime, he was seen as a really fierce advocate for actors and for entertainment rights during his career. I'm just really loving the fact that he came from theater, did the film work, and really put in his own political activism and his support for other actors as SAG president and on a broader political spectrum as a consultant to Republican presidents. Also, Norma Shearer handpicked him as her leading man for The Divorcee. So the Norma Shearer Robert Montgomery connection goes hard.
Yep. And I thought they were good together. I thought they had some good chemistry. There's times I almost wished it had leaned more in the direction of a rom-com. I felt like it would have been if they don't know the novel that it's based on, but I think it would have been almost a little bit more engaging as a film if it had a little bit more humor to it. I mean, we get a little bit here and there, but I think the 2 of them worked well together and it could have made a good early romantic comedy. So we already talked about the story a little bit. Like I said, I always want to read things, plays, stories, novels, whatever that these films are based on. But the cheapest copy of this novel that I could find was $150 online. So I wasn't about to drop $150 just so I could read this, and the closest library copy of the book was at the New York Public Library, which I'm not about to drive down to New York City to, just pick up one book, so
That's the way. We got the movie. We're good.
I already talked about the those pool scenes, and then the only other trivia piece that I had was that this was the last film that MGM released in the decade of the 1920s. Obviously, we're December 27th, 1929. So there's only a few days in the decade left. So interesting that this was the one they decided to go out with for the 1920s. So we'll move on to any reviews, and you were talking about themes earlier. Anything you wanted to touch on about themes or reviews or anything like that?
Production design is something that really stripped me. The production design is fascinating to me because, in comparison to the other early Oscar nominees that I've seen, this feels like a much more lavish production. Even Coquette had an element of let's make a movie to it, even though it was set in a rich Southern family's plantation. Their own desire felt I felt the extravagance a little bit more. And considering that the Great Depression had just hit, the dichotomy of the very lavish setting and the reality that was facing Americans during this time was stark, or at least more stark than I remember it being.
Yeah, no, I definitely had that in the back of my head. We see the scenes of these people playing polo, these people at these lavish parties with the barbershop quartet they're singing and the fireworks and the champagne and all of this stuff. And that's not something that 99.9% of the people in this country probably had access to at this time. So I don't know when this was actually shot and filmed, but I'm assuming it was probably either just before or maybe even during the time of the crash a few months earlier. So,
Mhm.
I don't see anything where they kind of shifted at any point and said, let's shy away from this extravagance. But, I wonder if that was on the mind of the people who made the film when it was coming out. Like, is this really the best portrayal we want out there right now with these characters?
Yeah. I can only say from experience that I've been knee deep in my revisit of The Crown lately because it is cloudy, it is rainy, it is all cozy food season, and The Crown just fits into that oeuvre. But The Crown makes no bones about the fact that in times of economic despair, people want to see aspirational content. If you think about what was happening with the British markets, especially during the 60s, the focus on the crown being a status symbol as a way of we're actually doing more okay than we think we are felt heavier. And so I wonder if that thinking was the eventual thing that got MGM to greenlight this when people were at their worst, really.
Yeah. And the thing I didn't mention too that I forgot to bring up, so the story, the book, the novel was published in 1929 as well. I don't know the exact publication date of it. Obviously, it's got to be sometime earlier in the year, but this felt like a very, very quick turnaround from publication of the novel to greenlighting a film, casting it, shooting it, and releasing it by the end of the year. It struck me as very quick for that, and especially at this time period.
For sure. And the cool thing is that you had the writer of the original novel involved with the writing of the screenplay. So I'm sure that you mean even if we haven't read the novel, I can assume that it stays pretty faithful just because the original novel writer was so involved.
Yeah. So I actually wasn't able to find any contemporary reviews from the time period that this was released. I did a brief survey of some of the modern websites where people rate movies. This film has a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, so not great there. IMDb is a little higher with a 5.8 out of 10 and a 3 out of 5 average on Letterboxd. So those two are pretty close in that high 58, low 60 range for those two once you kind of equal them all out in terms of the rating systems. It's the one I did find two reviewers on Letterboxd who had written reviews. Someone named Chris Hughes said it's a tangled plot with a lot of unnecessary action and one huge turn of events that comes out of nowhere in the last 10 minutes, leading to a happy but perplexing ending. And then there's another one on Letterboxd, a little bit more favorable. This one from someone whose screen name is Gentry says, "Y'all really underselling this. Norma Shearer and Robert Montgomery in an erotic step sibling forbidden romance. Of course I'm obsessed."
Oh, we love Letterboxd.
So I hadn't thought of them as step siblings up until that point when I read that, but I went back and I thought, okay, yeah, I guess they, assuming that Henry the father and Mrs. Cheever did end up getting married, then yeah, they would technically be step siblings. So
But did they? They never mentioned that they would get married. They just wanted to run away together, right?
yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. But I mean,
Still.
still, they're in a relationship. They're as close to step siblings as you're going to get at that point. And then one other thing that I saw is a website called Stardust and Shadows. The writer there is Terry Sherwood, and she says Hopper, who's the director, who is actually a silent film director, does a good job with the pole action, swimming sequences, and boating scenes. Going back to I think one of my very first comments, when we started the polo scenes at the beginning, there's some really cool action sequences there with the polo, the whole swimming, and the shot of Jack jumping in. There's an underwater shot of the two of them kind of meeting at first glance underwater. So there's some impressive stuff there. Even if the story around it is as Mr. Hughes said, a tangled plot with unnecessary action.
And I concur.
So moving on to the Oscars, I know you said you had some stuff you wanted to talk about, Norma, in terms of the Oscars.
Yes, Norma Shearer won the Best Actress Oscar, not for her role in this movie, but for her role in The Divorcee, which I know you're going to be talking about later. The third Academy Awards was still rewarding films from, I think, both 1928 and 1929, so it hadn't gotten quite in
29 and 30 was
29
the
and 30. Okay.
third Academy.
Okay.
Yep.
But I would like to state for the record that this is my fourth time chatting with you about some great movies. And this is my third time covering the Best Actress winner. And I
That's
am
right. That's right.
honored to continue the streak. Norma Shearer strikes me, and I know we talked about her a little bit earlier, in comparison to Janet Gaynor and Mary Pickford's Oscar-winning performances as Best Actress. I mentioned earlier that Norma Shearer feels a lot more like a stand-up lady, which is why it's interesting that she didn't win for this performance, but she did win for The Divorcee. The Divorcee marks such a drastic change in her filmography from like truly a guy's girl and somebody that's more athletic and prone to stubbornness and making up her own mind to truly being a romantic lead with The Divorcee. Not that she doesn't do that in The Divorcee, but it's fascinating to see how the Best Actress trope has evolved just over those three Best Actress winners, and to see the kind of roles that Janet Gaynor and Mary Pickford took and Norma Shearer and how she's paved a career.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting to see the progression, and that's one thing I think I'm really looking forward to the further we get into the various years is just seeing what gets recognized, not just in the acting categories, but in all of these categories. We saw with Janet Gaynor, two of those films, Seventh Heaven and Street Angel, she's kind of that lowly street urchin type character. And then Mary Pickford is a much different character that gets recognized for Coquette at the second. And then this is again, a completely different type of character that's going to be recognized for The Divorcee and obviously recognized here in this film as well for Norma Shearer.
If you look at recent Academy Award history and you connect it back with those three women, I think the title role in Honora really sums up all three of them.
Absolutely. I was thinking the same thing as I was doing some of the research, and obviously, going back to look at who's won recently, and yeah, she's definitely a strong character. Honora is, and she's the same type of profession as some of those characters, and yeah, definitely a lot of all of those early ladies in the Honora character.
History repeats itself.
Exactly. Well, anything else that you want to touch on before we give some final thoughts and some ratings?
Now let's do it.
All right. I'll go first this time. I gave this a 6 out of 10. Like I said earlier, I really appreciate it only being a little over an hour long. You didn't have to, set aside a whole lot of time for it. There's not a whole lot that is, just crazy, oh my God, this is an amazing film that evokes that sort of reaction. It's just a good film. It's solidly put together. Yeah, the plot is a little wonky here and there, and there's a few too many coincidences, but I actually enjoyed it enough to kind of give those a pass. And I think 6 out of 10 for me is it's a good film. Would I necessarily sit down and watch it again? Maybe not, but I did definitely enjoy it while I was watching it.
I think I share a lot of your sentiments, Jonathan. I might be inclined to bump this up to a 7 or even a 6.5, sheerly for Norma Shearer's performance. Because this was my first introduction to her as an actress, I now see myself going back to this film and saying, okay, what kind of choices is she making in relationship to the camera, in relationship to her leading man, who was also her leading man on other films? There is a lot to forgive based on plot and the truly the name drop moment being the divide of the movie is jarring, and I do think that the comedic element of the first half of the movie was a lot stronger than the second half, but surely for Norma Shearer's performance, I'm gonna bump this up just a little bit more. I think I'm gonna settle on a 7 because I think I will come back to this.
I definitely her performance was definitely the strong part for me as well. And I do also want to mention too that it's as you've seen with a lot of the films around this time, because of the transition to sound, we get a lot of very stagey action. I know we talked about that in Coquette last time. I didn't feel as much of that here. Maybe it is getting some of those outdoor scenes, getting on the boat, getting out of the studio essentially. But I did appreciate that as well and wanted to mention that.
That's a good point.
Well, as always, I will include a list of resources, links to the reviews that I mentioned, anything else that we talked about throughout the episode, as well as where you can either pick up a copy of the film for yourself or watch it online. Maria, thank you so much once again for coming on the show to talk about Their Own Desire. Remind people one more time where they can find your work.
You can read me at Brunello Bombshell. That's Brunello bombshell.substack.com. And on Instagram and TikTok at Brunello Bombshell.
And don't forget to follow the Oscar Project at theoscarproject.substack.com. Be sure to come back for next Friday's episode of the podcast where I will be discussing the film The Rogue Song. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the movies.